What's up, guys? We have a viewer game analysis, so this should be pretty fun. Our viewer today is PNJ Home 7075. He's rated 1178, almost 1200 chess.com. His opponent Faizan Faruqi rated 1240, so he outranks our guy who has blue black pieces. Let's see what happens. So these guys are, let's say, around 1200. They're not beginners, but they're not advanced either. They they know a good amount about chess, but there's so much still left to learn. So black, uh, white. Oh, wait. Okay, yeah. I'm confusing myself. White starts with g3. Now, this does help develop a piece, but the pawn move itself does not uh, control much of the center. It controls one square. For example, if instead he moved e4, that pawn would develop the bishop while controlling two central squares. So for beginners and lower rated players, I do not recommend opening with fianchetto pawns. Better to try the more classical moves, but okay, it's fine. Black responds principally e5, pawn in the center. Perfect. Developing pieces, controlling the center. White naturally follows up with the fianchetto, developing a piece, controlling the center. Fine. Black responds with the pawn duo d5 and creates the ideal pawn center with these two bad boys covering so many squares. They're friends. They're holding arms, and they like that interlocked next to each other structure. Okay, so what happens next? White continues playing passively by going e3. Now this move, while it does open up a diagonal for the queen, it also creates additional light square weaknesses that weren't entirely necessary because he combined the moves g3 and e3, which double weakens that square, the f3 square. So anyway, black has many different ways to go about this. He can continue development, but instead he goes for a very early e4. I'm assuming his idea is disallow the knight development and blunt the bishop. So in theory, I like this, but I like this if it's much later in the game, you're fully developed, and even then, not entirely sure, because for two reasons. One, the reason white went e3, normally you move the e pawn to develop the bishop, but his bishop's already developed, so why would he go e3, right? Potentially, it's to put his knight here, right? Because he didn't want to put it here and block his own bishop anyway. So you're not really stopping the knight from going here because it probably wasn't going to anyway. But the much more important point is that e4 is not sustainable, and that's the most important thing. If you could keep this here, that's one thing, but you can't keep this pawn here. Even if white did something as simple as f3 to start breaking this down and developing pieces, or more principally d3, I'm just saying he can challenge the pawn with whichever pawn, and you can't maintain this. You're already overextended. You would need to play perfectly here as black to not be worse. It's not easy. It's not easy when you push pawns that early, from experience. So I definitely recommend do not push this e4 pawn. It's the opening you need to develop. This move e4 does not help you develop, does not help you castle. And I'm going to say it doesn't even hinder white, because he can go here, he can go here. Like, his pieces will still have squares. He'll still be fine. So anyway you do it, okay. Black lets you sit there for a little bit, and I suggested earlier the moves f3 and d3, and if to challenge the center immediately. And if you're not going to challenge the tip of the pawn immediately, eventually you would think, let me challenge this the d pawn with c4, but instead white puts his knight in front of the c pawn and challenges it. But that's never actually any real pressure for so many reasons. One, you can defend that pawn like infinite times. Two, c6 protects everything easily. So black develops a piece, he brings it out towards the center, protects the pawn. Can't be a bad move. White now goes d3 and challenges the center. This is highly recommended, as you don't want to let black finish his development and maintain this pawn structure controlling the whole center. So what does this threaten? Threatens the pawn. If you take, there's the queen trade. So you kind of have to do something about the queen alignment, one way or another. Okay, you decide to develop a piece and protect the center, support the square one more time. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So now if he takes your pawn, and let's say you take with the bishop, and bishop takes, and knight takes, forgetting about the d pawn if it's hanging or not, the queen trade is going to happen at the end of the line since you didn't take care of the alignment issues. It's not the end of the world. It just looks like the position's going to peter out and everything's going to be traded. So he does take, and you take with the knight. The reason I said bishop first was because the knight, by taking with the knight, what are the drawbacks? Well, it undefends the d5 square and therefore pawn, which is hit twice. So if he hits your queen, if queen takes d5, hitting your queen, you take, he takes, now he has this fork threat. Okay, so I don't like this. This is, maybe you're hoping he takes the way you want, but you still have to consider he might not do what you want and he might do a better move. So in light of that, you either take with the bishop or the pawn, and because the queen trade is going to happen whether you like it or not, no matter which order you take. So you don't hang the d pawn, you might as well take with the d pawn, right? At least here, after the queen trade, you're still blunting some stuff, which I guess was your intention to start with. But you take with the knight, and he does capture this pawn. It's not as forcing as taking with the queen, because in this position, like, the knight's not threatening anything, right? So you don't, like, it's not scary. You did lose the pawn, but it's not scary per se. And he's self-pinning in a way. At least when he took with the queen, like, it's in your face. This knight is now overwhelmed, hit 3 times. He has checks. This pawn's hanging. So you're like, okay, I'm queen trading. And then he takes with more threats. So that's why that's good for white. But now he takes with the knight, and he's not threatening any of those multiple things. And so you could say, you know what, guy? c6, which is what you do. Kicks the bishop. Now you get the queen trade, which means he can't castle, and you have this forking option. And it beautifully blunts the bishop the right way. So he retreats the knight to its most logical square, double hitting your knight, so your knight's hanging, and the queens are staring at each other. So you say, you know what? I'm not going to queen trade. What am I missing? Queen trade takes. Isn't that a fork? Which means he has to take with the knight. And that still looks kind of good. I don't know. Okay, queen e7. The one thing I don't like is it blocks the bishop. I guess you can play g5 and fianchetto. You can play g6, but your pieces are kind of awkward. Okay, but whatever. I mean, he goes knight e2. This develops a piece, protects the knight, doesn't block the diagonal of his own bishop, hits some central squares, prepares castling. Very natural move. This is kind of awkward development now. You're gonna have to waste another move somehow with the g pawn. This would be nice, you know, put a knight here and a rook here, but then you're not castling. Yeah. So you do that. You put a knight here. And he goes b3 because he wants to fianchetto. Interesting. I guess it makes sense. I mean, it weakens the c3 square for a second, but next move he's gonna put the bishop here. So if you can't take advantage of it like right away. So instead you just castle long because it's gonna take forever to castle short. And this makes sense. It's kind of scary in a sense, like, yeah, it's blunted, but it's blunted on the pawn that's protecting your king. So like, you know, he could take that at some point. He could sack his bishop. But that's far in the future. I'm just saying, if he castles short, Black's king looks a little more, you know, vulnerable. Although, this is Black's best move, so whatever. So White castles, and now it's just an opposite side castling. Who's more developed? But there is this alignment, which I do not like for White. I also don't like that his queen is boxed in and has no diagonals to work with. But again, it's going to take some time to resolve that, so fine. It's even, we'll say. So now Black tries to resolve the problem by moving his queen here. The one thing about this square is, you know, White's going to put his bishop here. So unless you have like a good follow-up in mind, knowing that he's going to put his bishop here, you don't put your queen here, right? Because he's going to put it here, which he does, obviously. And now it's like, oh no, my queen is in the middle. And it doesn't really have that many squares. Because you're not supposed to really play with your queen this early. And you still didn't finish developing. He doesn't have any, I guess, scary discoveries. Because the bishop's hanging right now. So he would have to protect it with the knight like this. Which doesn't win anything, but I don't like the alignment at all with your queen in the middle. Okay, so you decide to improve a knight, support a knight, so it's not as hanging and as loose, while attacking the queen with a threat. So that's nice that even though there's this alignment, you're the one who gets in the first shot. So maybe there was a point, you have some idea, let's see what happens, of why you put your queen here. Maybe it's too deep and I'm just not at the move yet. Okay, so he sidesteps because, of course, what else? And now you put your queen here, although I feel like that square was available 2 turns ago. But yeah. Okay, so you're trying to keep the pressure on the knight, but while removing yourself from the diagonal. Nice. I like the idea. I like the thinking behind it. Okay. So A3. What is this? What is this nonsense? Hold on. A3. I don't want to waste time thinking about what Faizan was thinking. Maybe he's trying to do this. I don't know. Maybe he's having a midlife crisis. So now we get a free move. Thank you, Mr. Faruqi. And black says, let's develop. Okay, let's develop a bishop. He didn't want to put it here. I'm guessing because he didn't want to block his rook. This lends some extra support. That makes sense, but this would have been a temporary thing, like the d6. It's just the transit point to get to either here, which is kind of cool, or even the defensive c7 is kind of cool. A lot better than the e7 square, right? So don't always just think about one move. Think about maybe a sequence, maybe a final destination square, because you would happily get this bishop in on the action, add more pressure. You would trade it even. So yeah, that's just an idea to think more than just like the first developing move. You can think a little further. So yeah, his whole idea was to kick the queen. But I mean, this is kind of crazy, I guess. It's just a waste of time. And it undefends these squares. So now the queen can kind of get a little closer, hit some more stuff, defend, and that's what you do. You're playing very well for an 1178. So white can't take it anymore. He needs to relieve the pressure. So instead of just normal developing, I don't know, rook d1, let's say, he caves in and he takes the knight in the center and opens up his bishop. So he grabs a piece. We need to grab it back, clearly with a minor piece. If we take with the knight, we're hanging the g-pawn, less than ideal, with tempo. So we take with the bishop. That makes much more sense in light of our hanging g-pawn. Fine. We now have a beautiful bishop. It's coordinating. It's threatening c2 pawn. The knight's hanging. This is looking really nice for black. It's funny, the engine's saying white's better. It's obviously because of a concrete sequence, probably. But anyway, white goes knight c3. This reblocks the bishop, only to attack this. I guess his idea was to cut off the coordination between the bishop and queen to save the pawn, and it saves the hanging knight. That's fine. So now you just trade for his strong bishop. So now he has no more light square control. King takes it. Now it's our turn. Okay, a really cool well, okay, it's not worth it. I was gonna talk about h5, but I was gonna say a really cool high level move would be h5, but after he goes h4, trying to talk you into like g5 and h4, it's a little too much. So let's go with your move in the game. Rook e8, good developing move, bringing another piece into the game. I like it. Okay, rook d1, very natural. He has to get his queen and rook out the right way, so he has to trade and scoot his queen over to make room for his other rook. Oh wow, so you do h5. I do like it. Can we both agree that logically it might even make more sense with the rook support? Yes, the queen supports, but still with the rook. Like if you were gonna play it anyway, I guess now would make more sense. And then if he played h4, I guess you could swing your rook over to where you did. Or you could crash through with g5, but that's kind of advanced. So you play h5, which is still good. Like it's a still good idea, definitely. Your king's not there. You're not like risking anything. It's a great. I like it, and I like your position, frankly. Useful moves. It would be nice to have my king like tucked further because it's kind of exposed in these diagonals. But for the time being, his pieces are kind of garbage. But they have potential to be good. But his knight currently is dominated, so he'll have to go back to make his bishop good. So we're fine. I like black's position. He trades, most natural. Of course, you trade, most natural. Now, like I said, he should move his queen uh, past the d file to make room for his rook, right? So that's what he does. I think now would be a beautiful time to have gone h4. Almost the whole point of h5 was to play h4, and you almost never support this h4 push with g5. The only reason you would play g5 is if he played h4 and you wanted to break that down. And even when he took, so let's say, wait, how am I doing this? Yeah, let's say he did this. It doesn't work in this line, but the whole point out, because your knight's here, but the point is you just push past h4 and you break through anyway, right? You sack that pawn. Here, there's a knight hanging, but, and even here it says it's fine. So anyway, you take, he moves his queen over, and now you go g5. It's fine, but the immediate h4 is faster, much faster. So he swings his rook over, which was the whole plan, to trade some stuff, relieve some pressure. After all, he is up a pawn. Now you go h4. And you can see that if he takes, it immediately gives queen access. So you didn't actually need this g-pawn. There's like, it doesn't do anything. So he trades. You take with the king. I don't like that because it exposes itself even further. Whereas if you take with the bishop, you can easily re-diagonal it. It's a much more solid move. If the queens were off the board, if there were no queens, then you could take with the king. But with queens on the board, you take with the bishop probably. So that's something to think about. So now white wants to bail out, pawn up, can't blame the guy, and he attacks your queen. You're a pawn down, so you don't really want to trade. You want to take some type of counterplay. You want to find some pawn that's hanging at some point or attack on the king. You don't want to trade queens, so you don't. Very good. The thing is, it's going to be, you don't have much. You have these guys. It's going to be a struggle, but let's see what happens. It's easy to win a pawn back at this level, so definitely don't give up. And mentally, you should be saying, okay, what's the best move? How do I apply more pressure? Like, you should still absolutely be trying to win. b5. So I feel the like natural move is I would take my most powerful piece and improve it. So I would like queen d3 check, and then the heck was that? Queen d3 check, and then anything else I was gonna do. But he goes b5. I guess he's trying to break down the pawn cover in front of the king. Okay, it undefends these squares, which I guess gives the bishop more options, but that doesn't seem to matter. And if he takes, and you take with the queen, it's not the end of the world. Your king is exposed, but he has the same like limited stuff that you do. So you open up his king, because what else is there to do really? And he just takes back, and it's not like you have a rook on h8, so what are you going to really do with this? You know, but he can't do much to you. It's hard to say. But of course I'd rather be white because I'm up a pawn here. And it's getting closer to an end game. All I want to do now as white is trade the queens. Like, I'm just trying to trade the queens. So as black, I'm just waiting for white to make a mistake. I'm looking for ways to apply pressure, attacking moves, active moves, things like that. It's not easy though. It's kind of hard to suggest stuff, to be honest, because at the end of the day, my king's in a weak square. If you want to waste time moving it, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'd want to go like king e8, but whatever. Let's see. So yeah, you jump your knight in to an active square. Again, knight d5 was another active, beautiful square. But at the same time, this still allows um, trades, and he's up a pawn, so it's scary. Because it's hard, because I don't want to trade, but all active moves offer trades with the knights. So he throws in this check, which not only hits the king, but double hits the knight. And so black is mandatory, has to bring the knight back because it's hanging. So he finds the only move. Very good. And now white says, you know what? What's the most forcing active move? Capture in this position. We're going to take. And we're going to open up the king side. He's going to take back. And now his king is weak. He's got diagonals and squares all over the place. He's pinned. If I'm white, I'm happy here. Definitely happy. I feel like I'm up material and with pressure on the king. So white tries to improve his position. So our guy, our homie, PNJ Home, has 6 minutes. Faizan has 23 minutes. He wants to open up his bishop and improve his knight simultaneously. So what does he think? Knight e4. Boom. But what's the drawback? His piece is hanging. Like, boom. Oh, I see. He's confused because this is pinned. So he thinks the piece isn't hanging because the knight, like, yeah, there are two attackers, but if the knight's pinned, it's really only one attacker, and he has one defender, so math is equal, right? Not really. Because you take with the... Oh, wait, did you do it? Oh, you missed it. Oh, big miss, big miss, big miss. Free game. And this is how you just win games. Like, if you spot these things, you just literally free elo. The game's over, and you go up points. So his knight's hanging with a check, and if the queen takes, the knight is unpinned, and you win the knight. So that's a game-winning boom. So when your opponent makes a move, if you look at my speedrun series, I use different thought processes in my videos. So my speedrun, I use like the same questions, and in the viewer analysis, I use like a different approach. But let's say we go back to the other one, and because when you're playing the game, you'll say this. Your opponent does this move, and you say, what's the threat? Okay, it pressures my pawn, no big deal. The knight, it's protected. It's just a more active move and opens the bishop. Okay, what's the drawback? Well, it's hit twice. Can I take? You calculate, I can take. Fine. But you can't not even calculate, right? So anyway, you go king c7, which theoretically is a good idea because you're unpinning and defending the knight. So it seems like it's accomplishing quite a lot, actually. So other than missing the tactic, it's a good move, strategically, let's say. What am I missing? This guy, he's playing a great game, then he hangs the knight, and then he goes and grabs this pawn, which hits the queen, but is hanging, is it not? What is the threat? My queen is hanging. What is the drawback? His knight is hanging. Chess is easy. Poof, poof. That's me slamming my head against the table. So if you did this, what were you afraid of? I'm just gonna assume you didn't see it. Instead, you gave a check. But this allows him to I mean, he could even as simply as take your queen, and then you have to take back, so then he has time to do whatever he wants with his knight. It's not hanging. So that's simple enough. So yeah, he had he hung his knight 2 moves in a row, and you just refused to take it. You're a lot nicer than I am. So he takes your queen, like I said, you take back because you have to. And he says, you know what? Third time's a charm. This guy, he doesn't even see it. He's never going to see it. I'm going to leave it here because it's clearly an invincible piece. And instead he improves his bishop and creates a pin. Note, knight is still hanging. Black says, you know what? I'm gonna win your piece. But I'm sophisticated. I'm not just gonna take it. That's way too barbaric. I'm gonna fork you. Oh wait, fork doesn't work. Because you can get rid of it with check. Which he does. And you take with the king, and now his knight escapes. 3 moves in a row. He's like, take me, take me. And you're like, nah, not gonna happen. Whew, okay. And yet, the position is still salvageable. So he finally realizes, hey, maybe my knight's under attack. I should move it. You had to put a pawn here for him to see it. For both of you to see it. King c5. King active in the endgame. I love this move. As much as I was just making fun of you earlier in a nice way, this move I actually love. Active king going like up, attacking pawns and opening the bishop. This is a beautiful move. Almost makes up for not taking the knight 3 moves in a row. So he puts the knight in the center. What does this threaten? I mean, maybe further jumps, but it really just solidifies a beautiful knight on an outpost, blockading your pawn. Very strong move, obviously. You move your king up. Before it was good, if you could keep marching towards this pawn and take it, but considering the knight's here defending, I don't know. I mean, it's still fine. You got to take this pawn in because you have nothing else to do in that position. So he moves his knight and hits your bishop. But now you're just going to take his pawn. Wait, or not. I just assumed that's my fault. Instead of taking the free pawn, you defend this pawn. You see, the thing is, he has 5 pawns, and you have 3. So in no world do you win this game, right? The only thing you should be trying to do right now is draw. And the only way you can draw is by taking as many pawns as possible from this guy. You want to trade your pawns for his pawns at all possible moments, and then take as many free pawns with your piece as you can, and then try to draw. Whether he's up 1 pawn or up 2 with the piece, you want to create some type of draw situation. So you need to take as much as you can as fast as you can. Going here just gives him time. Yeah, okay, yeah, he doesn't win your pawn, but you don't win his pawn. Therefore, his advantage remains. And so he can take his move and just push his advantage by pushing his other pawns. Or improving his king, right? So you might as well take his pawn, because you're not going to win the game. So you need to just take everything of his. Okay. So this is lost no matter what. I mean, it says it's 0.5, I guess, perfect engine play, but it would be, I'd be very surprised to see anybody draw this, really, who's not a title player. What's happening? Why can't I press the moves? Okay, so he moves his king up, and you move your king up, attacking the pawn. He moves his king up further. You take the pawn. He moves his king up further. And you try to get behind his pawns. This square makes more sense because the diagonal gets there just as fast and it controls the e4 as a possibility. He takes your pawn and you still hunt his pawns. That's fine. You have nothing else to do. Like I said, you have to try to take as many pawns as possible. He pushes. You take one. The problem is this guy's... he's a runner. As Usain Bolt right there. And yeah, you try to stop it. But even if you do that, you might as well have taken this pawn first, because you can always bring it back. He goes up, and this doesn't actually stop it unless you're going to sack. And if you were going to sack, you might as well take this pawn and go behind with the check and sack. That way you win another pawn. And if you can take this pawn, sack for this pawn, and your king takes this, draw. Doesn't matter if he's up a knight. You can't win with just a knight. And so that was a potential opportunity for you. But instead of taking the pawns, you're just rerouting your bishop back and forth. Your bishop doesn't matter. You just need to do everything you can to take these 3 pawns. That's your drawing condition. Now he takes a pawn. But now you can gobble a pawn in return, which you do. I guess this guy is... he can start pushing this guy. Instead, he brings the knight back. Wants to get it closer to the center. It's a somewhat complicated endgame. It's kind of hard to really talk about. So you go king over trying to win this pawn. Don't you wish you would have eaten it already with the bishop a long time ago, right? So now he pushes it. You try to chase it. And he relinquishes control of this. The thing is, this connection was important because it always and forever, hold on. It always threatened g7, g8. But now, once you move the king, g7 is never a threat, which means his bishop has free reign. That's not good for white. So black just pushes the pawn. Maybe he's hoping, I don't know, that he can get a passer of his own. Some type of counterplay. If white pushes, black pushes. That's fair. But white does push, and he's probably faster, but this makes perfect sense. It's very hard to calculate for many reasons. King b5 in attempt to stop the pawn, saying, hey, I'll sack. That's very worthy. He goes for it. He goes for it. And now if black can sack his bishop for this pawn, it's a draw. But after the knight comes here, you can see, well, he resigned. Now, I don't agree with that. I do think that black should absolutely have attempted to scratch that. Just resign. You win. You win. You win. You ruined it. You ruined it. No, but for real, back it. Yeah, like back wherever, you really just need to take this pawn, and what happens is, like, if you just take this pawn and get your bishop on this diagonal, it covers so many squares. It makes it so much harder for the pawns to push unless they're supported by the king. So it ties him down, and you barely ever have to move your piece again. And also his knight, it goes to the end of the board, and to get it back to, let's say, h6, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. But let's say you needed h5, then that could be like 5 or 6 moves or 7. and it just takes so long compared to a bishop to cross the terrain. Let the knight go to the edge of the board, and your goal: take all his pawns, sack the bishop. Um, Hopefully some of this made sense. Hopefully some of it helped. You let me know. You keep giving me your games, guys. Keep grinding and having fun playing chess.